you're let out for an hour in an underground concrete pit, where you can't see into the distance.
You're actually 20 feet below ground. You're underground. The silence is deafening. They will shoot you with a regular bullet. No questions asked. I knew when I was there, this was hell.
I don't know what hell is, but I do know that the assumption would be for a free person, would be pretty close to it.
Puesto que perdí todo. Perdí la sensibilidad, los oídos, los ojos.
For years, the world has been plagued with cartels, and with them has come death, drugs, and violence. From Pablo Escobar to El Chapo, drug lords have rained horror, violence, and drugs on the most vulnerable people. So it makes sense that the world's scariest drug lords will be locked up in some of the world's most brutal prisons. These are where the walls are high, silence is deafening, and pain reigns supreme. So get ready as we delve into the world of fear and take an unforgettable journey into some of the most brutal ways the scariest drug lords are locked up. El Chapo. With his reputation as one of the most dangerous drug lords in history, we couldn't start this list with anyone other than El Chapo. Archibaldo Guzman Loera was born on April 4th, 1957 in a tiny village of La Tuna in Sinaloa. You might have wondered how the world's most dangerous drug lord was as a child, if there was any signs of the evil he would later become. The answer is no. He grew up in a very poor family and was unimpressive as a child. He was so short, he got nicknamed El Chapo, or Shorty. But that once unimpressive name would become one of the most feared names. The mere mentioning of it causes even dangerous men to shiver. Being born in Sinaloa, a land known for its rich drug trade, and being born to a drug dealer father, El Chapo's path was already clear. His drug dealing career started very early on in his life when he helped his father grow for local dealers in Culiacan and Guamuchil. But after years of watching his father squander the profits they made from selling drugs on alcohol and women, El Chapo decided to cultivate his own plantation when he was just 15 and supported his family with his own profits. His father would later kick him out of the house, and there he would begin his journey in organized crime. By the late 1970s, El Chapo began working with Hector Luis Palma Salazar. Hector Salazar was a rising drug lord at the time, and El Chapo helped him map routes to make drugs through Sinaloa into the United States. By the mid-1980s, El Chapo had moved on to supervising logistics for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, aka El Padrino. He immediately stood out with his quick wit and business acumen. He built sophisticated tunnels for drug transport into the United States for El Padrino. But after El Padrino was arrested, El Chapo took over a faction of his operations, moved it to Sinaloa, and formed the fearsome Sinaloa cartel.
The most powerful is the Sinaloa cartel. Almost the 70% of the world is infected by this cartel.
When El Chapo formed the Sinaloa cartel, he had learned enough from working with different cartel leaders to know he wanted to do things differently. Because he saw how quickly cartels were destroyed after the capture of their leaders, he decided to make the Sinaloa cartel a loose network of drug traffickers adaptable to change and leadership, rather than a strictly organized pyramid with a chain of command.
So the structure is one that, on the one hand, has clear lines of commands, but at the same time, there is enough flatness to it that losing a particular branch or particular segment of the network doesn't bring the whole organization under.
Because of its loose network of drug traffickers, everyone chips in, but it also makes it easier for them to disappear when trouble comes, and most importantly, it preserves the cartel in the event of the capture of its leaders. But El Chapo wasn't just a smart businessman, he was also a brutal drug lord who committed such evil acts as to warrant a place in one of the most terrifying prisons in the world. So what exactly did El Chapo do to land him in the feared and legendary ADX Supermax prison?
The long road that led Chapo Guzman from the mountains of Sinaloa to the courthouse behind us today was paved with death, drugs, and destruction.
When El Chapo was arrested for a third and final time in 2016 and extradited to the US, he immediately went on a year-long trial. And during the course of the trial, there were a lot of testimonies from people who worked for El Chapo. They all gave detailed testimonies, and some of the things will chill even the hardest of people to their bones. Most drug lords employed the use of a henchman to kill anyone who stood in their way, but El Chapo was different. He preferred to do himself with his bare hands. One of the most shocking things the court heard during El Chapo's trial was when one of El Chapo's hitmen, a man named Isaias Valdez Rios, aka Memen or Memo, testified about how he saw El Chapo kill a member of the rival Arellano Feliz cartel. According to Memo, El Chapo had the victim for days and had burned him severely with an iron on his neck and a car ladder all over his body. But the rival cartel member was holding out on El Chapo. He wouldn't cough up the information El Chapo wanted, so El Chapo decided to up the ante. He left him badly burnt in a chicken coop for days, hoping he would come around eventually and spill the proverbial beans. El Chapo had not counted on the man's ability to withstand immense, because when he was brought back out and interrogated twice, he still wouldn't cooperate. At this point, a man willing to withstand this level of and still keep his mouth shut was a man El Chapo couldn't break. So in a fit of rage, El Chapo shot the man. But this man must have had 9 lives or something, because what was supposed to be a kill shot missed the mark on the kill part. The man was still breathing, and this frustrated El Chapo beyond measure. The man had wasted his time. His effort had proved unsuccessful, and to make it worse, the man dared to still be breathing after a kill shot. El Chapo was done. He decided one last method of one that will kill him, but just before he did, it would bring him immeasurable fear and pain. El Chapo ordered his men to bury the rival cartel member while he was still breathing, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. The next one is way more horrific. Memo worked for El Chapo for 7 years before his capture, so he had lots of tales to tell, a lot of beans to spill if you will. But this other tale is one for the books. El Chapo's henchmen captured 2 members of a rival cartel that was proving to be a problem for El Chapo, the Los Zetas cartel. Where El Chapo was calculated and sophisticated, the Los Zetas were not. There was no rhyme or reason to their madness, and this rubbed El Chapo the wrong way. He wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth, and when he caught 2 of their members, he made an epic example out of them. According to Memo, El Chapo had received a call in 2016 that his men had picked up a couple of Zeta cartel members and were heading their way to see what information they could get from him. When the men were brought to El Chapo, he started them in within an inch of their lives, and just when they thought that it was over, there was something worse coming their way. El Chapo shot both the men in the head, but then he turned to his men and uttered the chilling words, "I don't want any bones to remain." His men automatically knew what he meant. They were to leave no single evidence. So they prepared a bonfire, not the kind you see at parties, no, the kind raging enough to burn human flesh and bones. They then tied the bodies of the Zetas men to the back of an ATV and dragged them into the bonfire. They dumped them in and watched them burn till there was nothing left for anyone to find. El Chapo always devised creative ways to destroy his enemies. He had the ability to wipe an enemy off the surface of the earth while striking fear in the hearts of those who remain, all at the same time. And in 2010, he did one of the most brutal things ever.
In a new incident of grisly drug war violence, a man's face and scalp were stoned to a soccer ball as a threat to members of Mexico's Juarez drug cartel.
Just in case people have gotten used to regular, El Chapo decided to take it a step further to cause more fear. In 2010, El Chapo ordered the kidnapping of a member of a rival cartel, Hugo Hernandez, but Hugo wasn't just and killed. His body was into 7 different parts and placed all over the street for the police to find. There's more. Hugo's head was off with a chainsaw, but El Chapo decided that wasn't enough. He took it a step further by his face from his skull and stitching it onto a soccer ball. The soccer ball with Hugo's face was placed in a plastic bag near Los Mochis City Hall in Sinaloa. After the jury heard all the horrific things El Chapo had done, they had no choice but to find him guilty and send him to prison. But since El Chapo had previously escaped from 2 prisons, they knew not just any prison would hold him. So they sent him to a place fit for the horrors he had committed, a place where he would face a special curation of horror himself. They demanded him to a fate worse than death. They sent him to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, a place referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place its own former warden called a cleaner version of hell.
The Supermax is a life after death. It adds punishment to the crime, in my opinion, far much worse than death.
The ADX Supermax is the most secure prison in America and is home to criminals deemed dangerous for regular prison. The ADX was built in 1994 in the middle of nowhere, 100 miles south of Denver and 40 miles south of Colorado. The ADX has 6 units, but only uses 4 because of its low population. The General Housing Unit, the Control Unit, the Special Security Unit, also known as the H Unit, and Range 13. The General Population Unit is the lowest security unit. Inmates located there get to speak to one another and share a dining hall. They're also allowed to walk around unsupervised and can secure themselves in their own rooms. Inmates here can get transferred to other prisons if they show good behavior. The Control Unit is next. This unit houses criminals who have committed serious conduct violations or act of violence against staff or fellow inmates. The Special Security Unit houses terrorists. And lastly, There's the most secure and terrifying Range 13. Range 13 is a full cell wing where the prisoners are completely isolated and have virtually no human contact.
You're designing it so the inmates can't see the sky, intentionally. When it really hits you is that you're looking at the beauty of the Rocky Mountains in the backdrop. When you get inside, that's the last time you'll ever see it.
Range 13 houses the most dangerous of criminals like El Chapo. This is where El Chapo is spending his life sentence. So how is life for El Chapo in Range 13? Well, El Chapo, like other prisoners in Range 13, likely spend 23 hours of his day completely isolated in a 7 by 12 foot cell and is only let out for 1 hour a day. To give you a good idea of how small his cell is, imagine the smallest closet space with very little wiggle room. That's what El Chapo's space is like. El Chapo is guarded round the clock by armed escorts. His cell's thick walls, floors, and ceilings are made out of solid concrete, and everything in the cell is built into it. He has a small desk, a stool made of stone that is barely big enough for him to sit on, and a concrete bed with a thin mattress. El Chapo also has a small black and white TV in his room, but it's clearly not for fun because it's only broadcasts religious, educational, and recreational shows. His room also has a small shower with a timer so inmates don't try to themselves, as well as a small toilet that automatically shuts off when blocked, and a sink with no tap so they don't try to hurt themselves. And to cap it off, his cell also has a double set of sliding metal doors with a solid exterior that separates him from the hallways so he can't see past his cell. The double metal doors also keep him from hearing anything outside his cell and knowing when guards are passing. Because the cells are solid concrete and soundproof, El Chapo can't communicate with the inmate in the cell next to him, which reinforces the feeling of isolation. The light in his cell are also controlled remotely by guards and are on 24/7, which will likely confuse El Chapo about what time it is and whether it is day or night. El Chapo's cell in ADX Florence is more of a tomb for the living than a prison cell. Nothing in it is designed for comfort. For 1 hour a day, the inmates in Range 13 are allowed out. They're picked up, strip searched, handcuffed, and escorted out. But spending an hour out in the ADX Florence is not like any prison. For one, the inmate is not taken to the yard where they can enjoy sunlight and beautiful sights. No, they're taken to a boxy small space with no views and no sunlight. But the worst is yet to come. ADX Florence did not earn its reputation for its small cells and lack of sunlight. It earned its reputation for the mental it inflicts on its residents. Being in isolation 23 hours a day can be debilitating, and even the most hardened criminal like El Chapo will begin to lose his mind. It plays tricks on your mind and is the most inhumane form of. Former residents of ADX Florence have described it as hell.
I knew when I was there, this was hell.
Even El Chapo himself has said that his living condition at ADX Florence has been the most inhumane situation I've ever lived in my entire life. It has been physical, emotional, and mental. He also told his lawyer that he has regular headaches and constantly throws up because the oppressive conditions at ADX Supermax. So it's safe to say El Chapo is getting a brutal punishment that fits his horrific crimes. El Padrino. Next is the man who gave El Chapo his start in sophisticated organized crime. Felix Gallardo. He may not have been one of the most popular drug lords. He's probably one of the least talked about cartel bosses, but Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo is one of the most influential drug lords that ever lived. He is the godfather of. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was born on January 8, 1946 on a ranch in Bella Vista, on the outskirts of Culiacan in Sinaloa. He graduated college where he studied business and took a job as a Mexican federal judicial police. This job will set up connections that he will later rely on in his drug trafficking career. Felix Gallardo's department at the Mexican federal judicial police was infamous for being corrupt. And in a desperate attempt to find stability and make more money after a childhood of destitution, Felix Gallardo turned to narcos for a way out of poverty. Felix Gallardo also worked as a family bodyguard for the governor of Sinaloa, Leopoldo Sanchez Salis. There he made political connections that helped him build his drug trafficking operation. Felix Gallardo did try to go on the straight and narrow for a while, but the allure of drugs and money was too much for him to resist.
¿Sabes por qué metí al narcotraficante? Dice, porque llegaban los narcotraficantes y se llevaban las mejores muchachas, traían los mejores caballos, traían el cinto piteado.
While working as a bodyguard for the Sinaloa governor, Leopoldo Sanchez Salis, El Padrino met Pedro Avillas Perez. He was another bodyguard to the governor, but he was also known to have been a drug smuggler. Not long after they met, Avillas Perez was recruiting Felix Gallardo for his enterprise, and when Avillas Perez died in a shootout with the police in 1978, Felix Gallardo took over the business and consolidated Mexico's drug trafficking system under a single operation, the Guadalajara cartel. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo would then become known as El Padrino, or the godfather, of the entire criminal organization. El Padrino quickly discovered he was very good at running a cartel. In the early 1980s, the United States government was cracking down on drug trafficking in Florida, which was then the major shipping destination for illegal traffickers. The Colombian cartels needed a new route, and that's where El Padrino and the Guadalajara cartel came in. But because El Padrino was a smart businessman, he refused to take cash for smuggling the Colombian cartel's drugs into the US. Instead, he asked for a 50% cut of the they smuggled. That proved to be a smart business decision for the Guadalajara cartel. They had hit the jackpot and were pulling in roughly $5 billion a year, according to rough estimates. By then, El Padrino's intelligence and business acumen were undeniable, and he was quickly able to establish dominance and had near complete control of the illegal drug trade in Mexico. That wasn't all. The Guadalajara cartel also operated a jaw-dropping Rancho Buffalo plantation, which reportedly measured up to 1,344 acres and produced up to $8 billion in product every year. The Guadalajara cartel was so successful that Felix Gallardo decided to expand his organization. He even partnered with the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel of Colombia to export his products to Tijuana. There was no doubt that Felix Gallardo's partnership with other cartels strengthened his business, but was probably the most helpful move for him that kept his operation running smoothly was the fact that he had the Mexican DFS, or Dirección Federal de Seguridad, intelligence agency in his pocket. El Padrino and his associates were heavily protected by the DFS. This prevented the Guadalajara cartel from getting into serious trouble along the way. As long as Felix Gallardo paid the right people, the ring of corruption kept his team out of jail and his cartel operations safe from scrutiny. That is, until the murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena Salazar. That was the beginning of the end for his brutal reign as the godfather of narcos. In 1980, DEA Special Agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was assigned to the administration's resident agency in Guadalajara. While working there, Agent Kiki was able to gather information about cartel plantations in Zacatecas state. He did his job and the plantations were raided and destroyed. After that, Agent Kiki struck again, and El Padrino's 1,000-hectare Rancho Buffalo in Chihuahua, famously known to be protected by Mexican DFS, was destroyed. Rancho Buffalo was a massive operation with thousands of farmers working the fields. The ranch was raking in $8 billion a year. It was clear Agent Kiki was hitting El Padrino where it hurt the most. He was taking his money from him. But Agent Kiki's move pissed El Padrino off and ultimately led to his death. Agent Kiki began to discover and expose the connections that existed between the Guadalajara cartel, Mexican law enforcement, and high-ranking government officials within the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, PRI. And El Padrino was not going to let that slide. He considered Agent Kiki's meddling to be a major threat to the Guadalajara cartel's operations throughout Mexico. In response, El Padrino reportedly ordered the kidnapping of Agent Kiki. On February 7, 1985, Jalisco police officers on the cartel's payroll kidnapped Camarena after he left the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara. His helicopter pilot, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, was kidnapped shortly afterward. They were brought to a house in Guadalajara, owned by Rafael Caro Quintero, where they were and interrogated over a period of 30 hours. El Padrino needed to know everything the U.S. government knew, and he was wasting no time finding out. But the way Agent Kiki was the most vile technique ever. He was with iron rods and ice picks, but the worst is still yet to come. He was badly. His skull, jaw, nose, cheekbones, and windpipe was crushed, and his ribs were broken. During the course of the interrogation, Agent Kiki was constantly injected with adrenaline and other drugs to keep him awake to prolong it. No amount of adrenaline can keep him awake after his head was with a drill. His body, wrapped in plastic, was found with that of his pilot, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, in a shallow hole on a ranch in Michoacan state. The U.S. government launched a full-scale investigation into Agent Kiki's murder. A special unit was dispatched to coordinate the investigation in Mexico, and El Padrino became suspect number one. But no amount of denial by El Padrino worked in his defense, and even though he kept a low profile, he moved his family to Guadalajara, where he was later arrested in Mexico on April 8, 1989. He was charged by the authorities of Mexico and the United States with the kidnapping and murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, as well as racketeering, drug smuggling, and multiple crimes. In order for the punishment to fit the crime, El Padrino had to be moved to a super secure maximum prison facility in Mexico called Altiplano, a prison often referred to as pure hell on earth.
Puesto que perdí todo, perdí la sensibilidad, los oídos, los ojos.
Altiplano Federal Prison is Almoloya de Juarez, is a maximum security prison known for its high security measures that keep some of Mexico's dangerous criminals in check. Altiplano Prison is surrounded by high walls made of reinforced concrete. Altiplano is no picnic. The living conditions are brutal, and any sentence lived out in Altiplano will be a nightmare for anyone. The cells are very small and prisoners have no access to sunlight. All they really have access to are basic amenities like a bed, toilet, and sink. Altiplano is an impenetrable fortress. Its walls are over 3 feet thick, and the airspace above it is strictly forbidden to all aircraft to prevent any plans of escape. But that's not all. The airwaves in the areas surrounding Altiplano have been deliberately restricted to prevent any communication from the outside world. Every inch of the prison is monitored by CCTV cameras to ensure that every move of the prisoners is caught on camera. El Padrino constantly complained of the brutal conditions of Altiplano while he was there. Even though he didn't exactly expect the princess treatment, Altiplano was a special kind of hell for El Padrino.
A todos nos han tratado mal. O sea, no visitas, no locutorios, no abogados.
El Padrino's cell in Altiplano was a dingy 8 by 14 foot hole that he was never allowed to leave. Isolation is the name of the game in Altiplano, and El Padrino suffered immensely at its hands. According to a former inmate of Altiplano, privacy in Altiplano does not exist. Altiplano was so brutal to El Padrino that he eventually developed vertigo, partial loss of sight, deafness, and blood circulation problems. He stayed in his personal version of hell for 30 plus years before he was later released on house arrest in 2022 due to his deteriorating health, after he had applied and been rejected multiple times. Thanks for watching, guys. What do you think about the brutal conditions these drug lords are locked up in? Do you know of any other brutal stories from the narco world? Let me know in a comment, and before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.